Today, global terrorism aims to kill and destroy as widely as possible. Al-Qaeda, occult or lone terrorists, any of them potentially able to shut down our ability to breathe or sicken us beyond medical hope. Al-Qaeda's notes and computers held plans for chemical weapons and worse. But the human race always has sought ingenious ways to kill. 1,300 years ago, the Greeks used a primitive form of napalm against their enemies. Scythian archers dipped their spears and arrows in blood and manure to cause illness in those they pierced. And the British gave Indians in America smallpox-infected blankets. But it was in the early 20th century that chemical weapons showed their gruesome capability. A German scientist named Fritz Haber believed using chemical weapons could change the military equation.
Fritz Haber developed the idea of using industrial chemicals, in this case chlorine, on a massive scale in the battlefields of World War I in an effort to overcome the stalemate of trench warfare.
At first, the generals refused to use gas, but finally in April of 1915, Haber's plan was approved. Almost 6,000 cylinders were set out, 168 tons of chlorine facing the Allied armies.
When the wind was blowing in the right direction, the troops opened the cylinders. The chlorine gas, which was heavier than air, billowed out and was carried by the breeze over the opposing trenches and caused significant casualties, actually tore a massive hole in the Allied front.
Compared to the killing gases of today, chlorine is crude. It is a greenish-yellow vapor that irritates the lungs, filling them with fluid. If not treated, the victim ultimately suffocates. It's like a slow drowning. Survivors suffer permanent lung damage.
The first filter that soldiers used, and it was effective, was their own urine. So what they'd do is take a handkerchief out and urinate into it and then cover their face. As bad as the smell might have been, it wasn't anywhere near as bad as the gas.
The gas broke the Allied lines, and so in 1915, the chemical arms race began. One side developed better masks to counter the other side's improved delivery systems, and both worked on nastier chemicals like phosgene and mustard gas, still in some national arsenals.
What mustard gas did was to burn the skin off a person as well as to burn the skin off his lungs, or the lining of his lungs. These are trauma or wounds inflicted in a few seconds, and the only real way of avoiding it was evasive action. That was the purpose. The purpose of them was to get someone to put his gun down and run away. The emotional state of absolute terror in the face of gas warfare was converted into a physical symptom. Someone's legs couldn't move, physically couldn't move, when he was surrounded by gas. The paralysis could last for years.
Others were blinded by the chemicals, not permanently, but long enough to affect a battle's outcome. A 19-year-old German corporal was one of many exposed to mustard gas. Years later, his twisted ambitions led to another world war. Adolf Hitler described his own agony in Mein Kampf. A few hours later, my eyes were like glowing coals, and all was darkness around me. More than 1 million soldiers were gassed during World War I. 91,000 died. Public revulsion brought the diplomats to the negotiating table. 6 years after the war ended, most nations had agreed to the Geneva Protocol on gas and bacteriological weapons, as they were called then.
The Geneva Protocol just banned first use, and it did not ban the production, the stockpiling, the distribution, or the transfer of these weapons from one nation to another.
So research continued, arsenals grew. During the years between the world wars, more potent gases were invented, including nerve gases like sarin that disrupt the body's nerve signals to the heart, lungs, and other organs. As World War II loomed, there were new fears of chemical attack. Soldiers and civilians rushed to prepare for chemical defense.
Here in the Ministry of Home Security, we try to set an example by wearing our masks once a week for a few minutes. Gas masks on, 5 minutes, please. Do you find that you can work quite well in your mask?
Yes, quite easily.
And it's quite comfortable, is it?
Yes, you soon get used to it.
That's great.
What is thought to be the perfect baby's gas mask has arrived, and it's being demonstrated by the Home Office in London. It looks something like a diver's helmet, and now the perfect baby's gas mask is being fitted with the perfect baby. In goes a few weeks old youngster, and the lower part of the apparatus is strapped round his body. He takes it all lying down.
As it turned out, they didn't need their masks. Gas was not used in battle. But Adolf Hitler, who was temporarily blinded by mustard gas in World War I, used gas more extensively than anyone else in history. He killed millions in the death camps of the Holocaust. In addition to using chemicals, the Nazis also conducted perverse biological experiments on concentration camp inmates. Meanwhile, Hitler's Japanese allies rushed to develop germ warfare.
In fact, we only know of one instance throughout the whole 20th century that biological weapons were used as a military weapon on a battlefield. And that was when Japan used them against China for some years in the late 30s, early 40s.
In 1939, Yoshio Shinozuka was a patriotic Japanese citizen. A young soldier, he was sent to China, assigned to Unit 731.
See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Those were the iron rules of the unit. At first, I did not know that the unit had such a savage plan. I obeyed what I was told.
Those who did not obey were whipped. General Shiro Ishii ran Unit 731 under strict discipline and secrecy. Ishii was a doctor and immunologist. In a compound of more than 150 buildings surrounded by high walls, Ishii ordered that human beings be infected with terrible diseases like plague, anthrax, typhus, tuberculosis, and then cut open to be studied.
We didn't use any anesthetic because it spoils the power of the germs. Back then, it was believed that developing the germs in the human body was the most effective way to mass produce powerful germs. Cutting open a live body was the best way to see what was happening.
They simply used people they disappeared off the streets of China. They would intentionally infect them and then autopsy them when they died, or oftentimes didn't wait for them to die. They wanted very good, fresh material to culture to see where the germs had gone, and they would tie them down on a table and autopsy them, often without anesthesia, what they call vivisection. They were pieces of wood. They were referred to as logs by the Japanese. They were just wood to be sawn.
These experiments were done on Chinese civilians and on prisoners of war. But Unit 731 scientists also grew germs for biological attacks. Shinozuka helped to breed fleas infected with bubonic plague.
We were told that we must follow the order and do these cruel things because it was good for the country and good for the emperor.
They simply grew fleas by the billions, infected them with plague, and then dropped them over Chinese cities. And we have very good accounts of this. And were able to start epidemics, some of which lasted for years.
This is the point in the horror of biological weapons. They can trigger epidemics of staggering proportions. Unit 731's fleas first infected rats on the ground.
It started with the rats, infectious rats, running around, especially in places with water. It's a horrible scene. The rats died everywhere, in the ditches, in the toilets, wherever there was water. Soon it spread to my family. 11 people of my family died, almost at the same time.
Altogether, General Ishii and the men of Unit 731 killed more than 250,000 people. When the war ended, Yoshio Shinozuka was captured by the Chinese. He spent 5 years in prison, the day he speaks out to prevent similar horrors and to try to clear his conscience.
After the war, I began to be aware of what I had done. I reveal war crimes that I had committed and Japan's horrible past in an effort to avoid repeating the same mistakes.
The Japanese government has never admitted the atrocities carried out by General Ishii, but Unit 731's buildings were destroyed by the Japanese as they retreated from China in 1945. Many of Japan's generals were brought before the American War Crimes Tribunal, but not General Ishii and not a single scientist from Unit 731.
In Japan, there were some war crimes trials, but not for any of the people who were part of their biological research or warfare program. And that was because we cut a deal.
The United States wanted Unit 731's research. To get it and to keep it away from America's newest enemy, the Soviets, the United States agreed not to prosecute General Ishii or his scientists. In exchange, it got details about deadly microbes and how they killed, based on dissections of the living. Ethical considerations were not a factor.
The information was certainly interesting, but really of little scientific value to us. Certainly interesting that they used human subjects in their testing, no matter how crude it was. The written results kind of coincide with what we found in the animal research on some of the similar diseases, and interesting stuff. But other than that, it was just put in a closet and really not looked at again.
The closet was at Fort Detrick in Maryland, where the Army ran its germ research.
You are in Fort Detrick, where some 600 military and civilian scientists work together in research at the Army Biological Laboratories to protect this country against a biological attack.
As the Cold War arms race with the Soviets accelerated, scientists on both sides focused on a variety of diseases. Some of them are now household words.
Well, they had to start from scratch and determine what were the potential agents. The conventional wisdom then was that anthrax was the #1 threat because it was stable. It could be manufactured in a form that could be delivered in any number of delivery systems.
Scientists at Fort Detrick worked on aerosols, clouds of disease-causing agents, or pathogens that could spread over a wide area.
To determine how much organism it takes to infect or kill a person was fairly simple for us to do. We would grow the organism or have our agent development people provide it for us, and we put it in a spray device, and in the test sphere we would hoist the spray device in the center of the sphere and then air pressurize it and blow the powder out. And we would push an animal out, say a monkey. We'd be